The gunshot that killed Catherine Thompson's husband on Christmas Eve, 1882, wasn't meant for him at all, but the bullet didn't care about intentions as it tore through his chest in the dusty streets of Ardmore, Indian Territory. Catherine stood in the cold December wind, her thin shawl doing nothing against the chill that seeped into her bones as she watched them lower James into the hard ground. The preacher's words were lost to her, drowned out by the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She was 23 years old, married for barely 2 years, and now completely alone in a territory that showed no mercy to the weak or unprepared. The funeral was sparsely attended. James had been a shopkeeper, a quiet man who kept to himself and ran his general store with modest success. Or so Catherine had thought. It wasn't until 3 days after Christmas, when Mr. Garrison from the Territorial Bank came knocking on her door, that she learned the truth about their financial situation. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm terribly sorry for your loss," Garrison said, removing his hat as he stood in the doorway of the small room above the store that had been her home. "But I'm afraid we need to discuss some urgent matters regarding your late husband's debts." Catherine's hands trembled as she gestured for him to enter. The room was sparse, furnished with only the bare necessities. She had already noticed how empty the cupboards were, how little money remained in James's lockbox. "Debts?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Garrison's face was grave as he sat across from her at the small wooden table. "Your husband had been borrowing against the store for the past 6 months. Business had been declining, and he took out several loans to keep things afloat. I'm afraid the total comes to nearly $3,000. The number hit Catherine like a physical blow. $3,000 might as well have been $3 million. She felt the room spin around her. "But the store," she managed to say. "Surely the store and its inventory are worth something. The bank owns the store, Mrs. Thompson. And I'm afraid the inventory has been pledged against the debt as well. We'll need to take possession within the week to settle what we can of the obligation." After Garrison left, Catherine sat in stunned silence. She had exactly $12 to her name, no property, no family within 1,000 miles, and nowhere to go. Her parents had died years ago, and James had been an only child like herself. The few friends she had made in Ardmore were acquaintances at best, not the sort of people she could turn to for help in a crisis like this. That night, she lay awake in the darkness, listening to the wind howl outside. Tomorrow was New Year's Eve, and instead of celebrating a fresh start, she would be facing complete destitution. The irony wasn't lost on her that Christmas, the season of hope and joy, had left her utterly alone and penniless. When dawn broke on New Year's Eve, Catherine rose with a determination born of desperation. She dressed in her simplest calico dress, pinned her dark brown hair into a neat bun, and set out to find work. Any work. Ardmore was growing rapidly as the Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railway had recently extended through the territory, bringing more settlers and commerce. Surely someone needed help, she reasoned. She could cook, clean, sew, and keep accounts. She wasn't afraid of hard work. But everywhere she went, the answer was the same. The hotel had all the staff they needed. The restaurant wasn't hiring. The laundry already had too many women working there. By mid-afternoon, Catherine's feet ached from walking, and her hope was beginning to fade. She was standing outside the Silver Star Saloon, gathering the courage to go inside and inquire about work, when a voice behind her made her jump. "I wouldn't go in there if I were you, madam." Catherine turned to find herself looking at a tall man in his mid-20s, wearing dusty trail clothes and a worn leather vest. His dark hair needed cutting, and several days' worth of stubble covered his jaw, but his blue eyes were kind as they regarded her with concern. "I beg your pardon," Catherine said, drawing herself up to her full height, which still only brought her to his shoulder. "No offense meant," the man said, holding up his hands in a peaceful gesture. "It's just that the Silver Star isn't the kind of place a respectable lady should be looking for employment. Unless you're looking for that particular kind of work, which I'm guessing you're not." Heat flooded Catherine's cheeks as his meaning became clear. "I certainly am not," she said stiffly. "I'm simply looking for honest work of any kind." The man studied her for a moment, and Catherine felt uncomfortably aware of how shabby her dress must look, how desperate she must appear. But instead of pity, she saw only thoughtfulness in his expression. "Might I ask what kind of work you're qualified for?" he asked. Catherine lifted her chin. "I can cook, clean, sew, keep accounts, manage inventory, and I'm not afraid of hard labor. I ran my husband's general store for 2 years before his death." "I'm sorry for your loss," the man said, and he sounded like he meant it. "My name is David Dalton. I own a ranch about 10 miles west of town. My housekeeper left 3 weeks ago to care for her sick sister in Texas, and I've been managing on my own since then. Badly, I might add. The place is a disaster, and I'm eating burned beans more often than not." Hope fluttered in Catherine's chest, but she tried to keep her expression neutral. "Are you offering me employment, Mr. Dalton?" "I'm considering it," David said. "But I should be honest with you. It's just me and 4 ranch hands living out there. It's isolated and the work would be demanding. You'd have your own room in the main house, separate from the bunkhouse where the men sleep. I'd pay you $30 a month plus room and board. That's more than fair for the territory. $30 a month. It was more than Catherine had dared hope for. But living on a ranch with 5 men, no other women around, would certainly raise eyebrows in town. Not that her reputation mattered much anymore. She had nothing left to protect. "I accept," Catherine said before she could second-guess herself. "When would you like me to start?" David blinked, apparently surprised by her quick agreement. "Tomorrow is New Year's Day. How about the day after? That'll give you time to settle your affairs in town." "I have no affairs to settle," Catherine said quietly. "I could start tomorrow if you need me to." Something flickered in David's eyes, understanding perhaps, or sympathy. "Tomorrow it is then. I'll pick you up at sunrise. Where are you staying?" Catherine gave him the address of the room above the store, and they made arrangements for her departure. As David tipped his hat and walked away, Catherine felt the first genuine spark of hope she'd experienced since James's death. It wasn't much, but it was something. A job, a roof over her head, and a chance to start rebuilding her life. That night, Catherine packed her meager belongings into a single carpet bag. She owned so little now. A few changes of clothes, her mother's Bible, a photograph of her parents, and her wedding ring, which she'd removed from her finger earlier that day. Looking at it now, she felt a complicated swirl of emotions. James had been a good man in many ways, but he had also kept secrets from her, left her unprepared and alone. She tucked the ring into her bag, uncertain what she felt anymore. True to his word, David arrived just as the sun was cresting the horizon on New Year's Day, 1883. He drove a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 brown horses, and he jumped down to help Catherine with her bag. "This is everything?" he asked, looking at the single carpet bag. "Everything that matters," Catherine replied. The ride to the ranch took nearly 2 hours. David was quiet at first, focused on driving, but gradually he began to talk, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the ranch. "I've got about 500 head of cattle right now," he said. "Not the biggest operation in the territory, but it's growing. I started with nothing 5 years ago, worked as a ranch hand myself until I saved enough to buy my first piece of land and a few head, built it up from there." "That's impressive," Catherine said, and she meant it. You must have worked very hard. Hard work is all I know, David said with a slight smile. I grew up in Missouri on a small farm. When my father died, there wasn't enough land to divide between me and my 3 brothers, so I headed west to make my own way. Indian Territory was just opening up for settlement, and I figured I'd try my luck here. Do you miss Missouri? Catherine asked. Sometimes, David admitted. But this is home now. What about you, Mrs. Thompson? Where are you from originally? Please call me Catherine, she said. Mrs. Thompson feels too formal if we're going to be working together. I'm from Kansas originally, a small town near Topeka. My parents had a farm there. After they died, I married James and we came south looking for opportunity. Did you find it? David asked quietly. Catherine was silent for a moment. I thought we had, she finally said. But it turns out I didn't know as much as I thought I did about my husband or our situation. Sometimes we only see what we want to see. David nodded, and something in his expression told Catherine he understood about disappointment and shattered expectations. The ranch, when they finally arrived, was more impressive than Catherine had expected. The main house was a solid 2-story structure built of wood and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and side. Nearby stood a large barn, a bunkhouse, and several smaller outbuildings. The land stretched out in every direction, rolling prairie dotted with cattle and stands of trees along what looked like a creek bed. It's beautiful, Catherine said, genuinely impressed. It'll do, David said, but she could hear the pride in his voice. Come on, I'll show you inside and get you settled. The interior of the house confirmed what David had said about his housekeeping skills. Dirty dishes were piled in the kitchen basin, dust covered every surface, and muddy boot prints tracked across the wooden floors. But beneath the mess, Catherine could see good solid furniture, well-built cabinets, and a large stone fireplace in the main room. I know it's a disaster, David said, looking embarrassed. I've been meaning to clean, but between the ranch work and trying to cook for myself, I just haven't had the time. It's nothing that can't be fixed with some elbow grease, Catherine assured him. Why don't you show me to my room and then I'll start setting things right? Her room was upstairs, a decent-sized space with a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the prairie. It was clean if dusty, and Catherine felt a wave of relief. This would do. This would do very well. She spent the rest of that day cleaning. David tried to help at first, but Catherine shooed him away, insisting he had ranch work to attend to. She threw open windows despite the January cold, swept and scrubbed and organized until her back ached and her hands were raw. By evening, the main floor of the house was transformed. When David came in at dusk, he stopped in the doorway and stared. I can't believe this is the same place, he said, genuine wonder in his voice. Catherine, you've worked miracles. Hardly miracles, Catherine said, wiping her hands on the apron she'd found in a closet. Just soap and water and determination. Now, I imagine you're hungry. Why don't you show me what provisions you have, and I'll make us some supper? The pantry and root cellar were reasonably well stocked with basics. Catherine found flour, beans, bacon, canned vegetables, potatoes, and onions. Within an hour, she had a hearty stew bubbling on the stove and fresh biscuits baking in the oven. David's 4 ranch hands joined them for dinner. They were a rough-looking bunch, weathered and worn from outdoor labor, but they were respectful enough. There was Pete, the oldest at perhaps 45, who served as foreman. Then came the younger men, Tommy, barely 20, eager and friendly, and 2 brothers, Jake and Samuel, both in their 30s, quiet and watchful. Madam, this is the best meal I've had in months, Pete said after his first bite, and the other men nodded enthusiastically in agreement. Catherine felt herself relax slightly. Whatever challenges lay ahead, at least she could prove her worth through her work. After dinner, the ranch hands returned to the bunkhouse, and Catherine cleaned up the kitchen while David sat at the table with account books spread before him. She was aware of him watching her as she worked, but his gaze didn't make her uncomfortable. It was more curious than anything else. "You never have to ask what needs doing," David observed. "You just see what's needed and do it." Catherine shrugged. "I've been taking care of myself and others for most of my life. It becomes second nature." "How long were you married?" David asked, then immediately looked apologetic. "Sorry, that's too personal. You don't have to answer." "It's all right," Catherine said, surprising herself. 2 years. We were happy enough, I suppose, though I'm realizing now that I didn't really know James as well as I thought I did. He kept his worries to himself, and I didn't push to know more. Maybe I should have." "A man's pride can make him foolish," David said quietly. "Sometimes we think we're protecting the people we care about by keeping our troubles from them, when really we're just making things worse." Catherine turned to look at him. "You sound like you're speaking from experience." David closed his account book and leaned back in his chair. "My father was like that. The farm was failing for years, but he never told any of us how bad things were until it was too late. He worked himself into an early grave trying to fix everything on his own. If he just asked for help, maybe things would have turned out different." "I'm sorry," Catherine said softly. "It was a long time ago," David replied, "but I learned from it. I swore I'd never be too proud to ask for help when I needed it, and I'd never keep important information from people who had a right to know. That's why I'm always straight with my men about how the ranch is doing, good or bad." It was full dark by the time Catherine finished in the kitchen. She was exhausted, every muscle in her body aching from the day's labor, but it was a good exhaustion. She had accomplished something. She had value and purpose again. "Thank you," David said as she prepared to head upstairs, "for all of this. I know taking this job was probably not what you wanted, but I'm grateful you did." "It's exactly what I needed," Catherine said honestly. "You gave me a chance when I desperately needed one. I won't forget that." Over the following weeks, Catherine settled into a rhythm on the ranch. She rose before dawn to start breakfast for the men, spent her days cooking, cleaning, mending clothes, and keeping the household running smoothly. It was hard work, but it was satisfying in a way her life in town had never been. Here, she could see the direct results of her labor. The house stayed clean, the men were well fed, and slowly she began to feel like herself again. David proved to be a good employer and, gradually, a friend. He was quiet but not cold, reserved but not unkind. He treated Catherine with respect, never making her feel like a servant but rather like a valued member of the ranch operation. Often in the evenings, after the other men had gone to the bunkhouse, David and Catherine would sit by the fire, and they would talk. She learned that David was 26, that he'd never been married though he'd come close once back in Missouri. Her name was Ellen, he told Catherine one cold February night. "We were planning to marry, but then my father died and everything fell apart. She didn't want to wait while I tried to make my way out here. She married a banker's son instead." "Do you ever regret coming west?" Catherine asked. David shook his head. "Not even for a minute." If Ellen couldn't see that sometimes you have to take risks to build something worthwhile, then she wasn't the right woman for me. I want someone who's not afraid of hard work, who understands that building a life takes time and effort. Catherine found herself thinking about that conversation for days afterward. She also found herself increasingly aware of David in ways that both surprised and troubled her. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the sound of his laugh, the gentle strength in his hands as he handled the horses. She told herself it was just gratitude, that she was confusing appreciation for attraction. After all, James had been dead for barely 2 months. She shouldn't be having these feelings for any man, let alone her employer. But the feelings persisted and grew stronger as winter gave way to early spring. There were small moments that caught her off guard. David bringing her wildflowers he'd found while checking fences, saying they looked too pretty to leave out there alone. The way he insisted she rest when she'd been working too hard, actually ordering her to sit down and have a cup of tea while he finished the dishes. The night she'd fallen asleep by the fire and woken to find herself covered with a blanket, David having carried her to the sofa so she could sleep more comfortably. In March, a late winter storm blew through, dumping 6 inches of snow across the prairie. One of the cows had wandered too far from the herd and got stuck in a ravine. David and Pete went out to rescue her, and when they returned hours later, David was soaked through and shivering uncontrollably. Catherine immediately took charge, sending Pete to the bunkhouse and ordering David upstairs to change out of his wet clothes. She heated water for a bath, made hot coffee laced with whiskey, and prepared hot soup. When David came back down in dry clothes, still shivering, Catherine made him sit by the fire and wrapped him in blankets. "You're going to catch your death," she scolded, pressing a cup of hot coffee into his hands. "I'm fine," David protested, but his teeth were chattering. "You're not fine. Drink that, and then you're going to eat this soup, and then you're not leaving this fire until you're completely warm." David looked up at her, and something in his expression made Catherine's breath catch. "You're bossing me around in my own house," he said, but he was smiling. "Someone needs to," Catherine retorted, trying to ignore the way her heart was racing. "You men think you're invincible, but you're not." David reached out and caught her hand. His fingers were cold, but his grip was firm. "Thank you, Catherine, for taking care of me." "It's my job," Catherine said, but her voice came out softer than she intended. "No," David said quietly. "Your job is cooking and cleaning. This is something more than that." Catherine knew she should pull her hand away, should step back and re-establish the proper boundaries between employer and employee. But she couldn't seem to make herself move. "I care about your well-being," she finally said. "You've been good to me, better than you had to be. I don't want to see you get sick." David studied her face for a long moment. "Catherine," he said slowly, "I need to tell you something. These past months, having you here, it's been more than just having a housekeeper. You've made this house feel like a home. You've made me look forward to coming in at the end of the day instead of dreading it. I find myself wanting to share things with you, wanting your opinion on decisions, wanting to hear about your day. And I realize that's probably inappropriate, given that you work for me, and that your husband just died, and that you probably need time to grieve. But I also think that life is too short and too uncertain not to be honest about how I feel." Catherine's heart was pounding so hard she was sure David could hear it. "And how do you feel?" she whispered. "I'm falling in love with you," David said simply. "Maybe I already have fallen. I know it's too soon, and I know I shouldn't be saying this, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel." Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. "I thought I was losing my mind," she said. "I've been having these feelings for weeks now, and I told myself it was just gratitude, or loneliness, or anything but what it really was. Because how could I possibly be falling for someone when my husband has been dead for less than 4 months? Your husband is gone," David said gently. "And from what you've told me, your marriage wasn't what you thought it was. You're allowed to move forward with your life, Catherine. You're allowed to be happy again." "I don't know if I know how anymore," Catherine admitted. David squeezed her hand. "Then maybe we can figure it out together. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or even to make any promises right now. I just want you to know how I feel, and I want the chance to court you properly if you're willing." Catherine thought about all the reasons she should say no. She'd known David for barely 3 months. She was still technically in mourning. People in town would talk if word got out that the widow Thompson was carrying on with her employer so soon after her husband's death. But none of those reasons seemed to matter as much as the simple truth. She was happier here than she'd been in years, and David Dalton was a large part of that happiness. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'd like that very much." David's face broke into a wide smile, and Catherine realized it was the first time she'd seen him truly, unreservedly happy. He stood up, still wrapped in blankets, and pulled her into a gentle embrace. Catherine leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of him, and allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, everything would work out after all. Over the following weeks, their relationship shifted in subtle but significant ways. David still treated Catherine with respect and propriety, conscious of not compromising her reputation with the ranch hands. But there were stolen moments. Their hands brushing as they passed dishes at dinner, long conversations by the fire that stretched late into the night, walks together in the early evening when the day's work was done. David told her about his dreams for the ranch, how he wanted to expand the herd, maybe buy some of the adjacent land when it became available. He talked about wanting to build a better life than the one he'd grown up with, wanting to prove to himself and his family back in Missouri that he'd made the right choice coming west. Catherine, in turn, found herself opening up about things she'd never told anyone. How she'd felt trapped in her marriage to James, not because he was cruel but because she'd felt like she was living someone else's life. How she'd always dreamed of having a real partnership with someone, a relationship built on honesty and shared goals rather than just obligation. "I want to matter," she confessed one night in late April as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie gold and red. "I want my life to mean something more than just cooking and cleaning for someone else. I want to build something, to be part of something bigger than just myself." David reached over and took her hand. "You already matter, Catherine. You matter to me, to all of us here. This ranch runs better because you're here, and I don't just mean because the house is clean and the food is good. You make us all better. Pete told me the other day that the men work harder now because they don't want to disappoint you. You've made this place feel like family." "But I'm still just the housekeeper," Catherine said. "No," David said firmly. "You're so much more than that. And if you'll have me, if you'll marry me someday, you'll be my partner in every sense of the word. This ranch would be ours, not just mine. Every decision, every plan, every success, and every failure, we'd share it all together." Catherine turned to look at him, her eyes wide. "Are you proposing?" David smiled. "Not officially, not yet. When I propose, I'll do it right with a ring and everything. But I'm telling you my intentions. I love you, Catherine, and I want to spend my life with you. When you're ready, when enough time has passed that you feel comfortable saying yes, I'll ask you properly." "What if I'm ready now?" Catherine asked softly. David's expression grew serious. "Then I'd say we should still wait. Not because I don't want to marry you, but because I want to do this right. I don't want anyone, including you, to ever wonder if we rushed into this. I want you to be absolutely certain that this is what you want, that I'm who you want." Catherine felt a surge of love for this man who was thoughtful enough to consider her feelings and reputation even when it meant waiting for something he wanted. "You're a good man, David Dalton," she said. "I just want to be worthy of you," David replied. As spring turned to summer, Catherine's life on the ranch settled into something that felt remarkably like contentment. She had friends now. The ranch hands had accepted her as part of their small community, and she'd begun to get to know some of the neighbors from surrounding ranches. When people asked about her relationship with David, She simply said they were good friends, that he'd given her work when she needed it most, and she was grateful. Most people seemed to accept this at face value, though she occasionally caught speculative looks from the other ranch wives when David's name came up. But Catherine had learned not to care too much about what others thought. She'd been through too much, lost too much, to waste energy worrying about gossip. In June, a traveling preacher came through Ardmore, and David suggested they attend the Sunday service in town. Catherine agreed, and they rode in together in David's wagon, sitting a respectable distance apart but both acutely aware of each other's presence. After the service, several people approached Catherine to offer their condolences on James's death. It had been 6 months now, and she found she could accept their sympathy with genuine grace. She had grieved for James, for what they'd had and what they'd never have, but she had also made peace with the past. One woman, Mrs. Sarah Patterson, wife of a neighboring rancher, pulled Catherine aside. "I hope you don't mind my saying so, dear, but you look healthier and happier than I've ever seen you. Life on the Dalton ranch must be agreeing with you," Catherine smiled. "It is. Mr. Dalton is a good employer and a good man." Sarah's eyes twinkled with knowing amusement. "I'm sure he is. And if I were a betting woman, which I'm not because that would be improper, I'd wager that he's going to be more than your employer before too much longer." Heat flooded Catherine's cheeks. "Mrs. Patterson, I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do," Sarah said kindly. "And I think it's wonderful. Don't let anyone make you feel badly about finding happiness again, Catherine. Life is too short and too hard out here to waste time being miserable when you don't have to be." Those words stayed with Catherine for days. She realized that she'd been holding back, still feeling guilty about her feelings for David, still worried about what people would think. But Sarah was right. Life was too short, and she'd already wasted enough time being unhappy. That night, as she and David sat together after dinner, she told him about her conversation with Sarah Patterson. "She said people are already speculating about us," Catherine said. David frowned. "Does that bother you? Because I can make it clear that you're just my housekeeper if you want." "I don't want you to be uncomfortable." "No," Catherine said quickly. "That's not what I mean. What I'm trying to say is that I don't care what people speculate about. I don't care if they talk or gossip or think it's too soon. I know what I feel and I know what I want." "And what do you want?" David asked quietly. Catherine took a deep breath. "I want you. I want this life, this ranch, this future we keep talking about. I want to stop waiting for some arbitrary amount of time to pass and just start living." David stood up and walked over to where Catherine sat. He dropped to one knee in front of her chair, and Catherine's breath caught in her throat. "I don't have a ring yet," he said. "I was going to go to Fort Worth next month and pick one out. But if you're saying what I think you're saying, I don't want to wait another minute to ask you properly." He took both her hands in his. "Catherine Thompson, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner and the person I build my life with? I promise I'll spend every day trying to make you happy. I'll never keep secrets from you or shut you out. I'll love you and respect you and stand beside you through everything life throws at us. Say yes, Catherine. Please say yes." Tears were streaming down Catherine's face, but she was smiling wider than she'd ever smiled in her life. "Yes," she said. "Yes, David, I'll marry you." David surged to his feet and pulled Catherine up with him, wrapping her in his arms and spinning her around. When he set her back down, he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her for the first time. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Catherine felt like her heart might burst from happiness. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, David was grinning like a fool. "I'm going to Fort Worth tomorrow," he declared. "I'll be back in 3 days with the best ring I can find, and then we'll tell everyone, and we'll plan a wedding and we'll start our life together properly." 3 days is a long time, Catherine said, only half joking. I'll ride like the wind, David promised. Nothing could keep me away from you any longer than absolutely necessary. True to his word, David left at dawn the next morning and returned 3 days later just as the sun was setting. Catherine had been watching for him all afternoon, unable to focus on her work, nervous and excited and so full of emotion she felt like she might float away. When she saw his wagon coming up the road, she ran out to meet him, not caring who saw or what they thought. David jumped down and caught her, lifting her off her feet and kissing her right there in front of Pete and Tommy and anyone else who happened to be watching. "I have something for you," David said, setting her down and reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a delicate gold band with a small but beautiful diamond set in the center. "It's not the biggest ring in the world," he said, suddenly uncertain. "But the jeweler in Fort Worth said it was the best quality stone he had, and I wanted you to have something that would last forever, just like my love for you." "It's perfect," Catherine whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "David, it's absolutely perfect." He slipped the ring onto her finger and they both stared at it for a moment, overwhelmed by the significance of what they were doing. "You're mine now," David said softly, "and I'm yours, for always." They announced their engagement the next day, and the reaction from the ranch hands was enthusiastic congratulations all around. Pete clapped David on the back and told Catherine she was getting a good man, and the younger men seemed genuinely happy for them both. In town, the response was more mixed. Some people congratulated them warmly, while others whispered behind their hands about the impropriety of remarrying so quickly after becoming a widow. But Catherine found that the disapproval of narrow-minded gossips bothered her far less than she would have expected. She had David, she had a future, and she had found herself again after Christmas had left her alone and penniless. That was all that mattered. They decided to marry in August, giving themselves 2 months to prepare. Catherine wanted a simple ceremony, nothing fancy or elaborate. She'd had a traditional wedding with James, and that felt like it belonged to another life, another person. This time, she wanted something that reflected who she and David really were. The wedding took place on a warm Saturday afternoon at the ranch itself, with the preacher from Ardmore officiating and about 30 people in attendance. Catherine wore a simple blue dress that she'd sewn herself, and David wore his best suit. They exchanged their vows under an oak tree near the creek, with the prairie stretching out endlessly behind them and the sky a brilliant cloudless blue overhead. "I, David Dalton, take you, Catherine Thompson, to be my lawfully wedded wife," David said, his voice strong and clear. "I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to be your partner in all things, to share my life and my heart with you completely. I promise to never shut you out or keep secrets from you, to always treat you as an equal, and to build a life with you that we can both be proud of." Catherine's voice shook slightly as she responded, but her words were heartfelt. "I, Catherine Thompson, take you, David Dalton, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you with all my heart, to stand beside you through good times and bad, to be your partner and your friend. I promise to help you build the life you've dreamed of, to work alongside you, and to never take for granted the gift of your love. You saved me when I had nothing, and I will spend the rest of my life showing you that your faith in me was not misplaced." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, David kissed Catherine with such joy and love that several women in the audience dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The celebration that followed was simple but heartfelt, with food and music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. That night, as Catherine stood in the room that was now truly hers by right, not just by employment. David came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought I could be," Catherine replied honestly. "A year ago, I was married to someone else, living a completely different life. If someone had told me then that I would end up here, married to you, I never would have believed them." "Do you have any regrets?" David asked quietly. Catherine turned in his arms to face him. "Not a single one. What happened with James was tragic, and I'm sorry he died. But I can't regret the path that led me to you." "Is that terrible?" "No," David said, kissing her forehead gently. "It's honest. And honesty is what we promised each other, remember? No secrets, no holding back." "No secrets," Catherine agreed. "I love you, David, more than I ever knew it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," David said. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." The first year of their marriage was filled with hard work, but also with joy. Catherine threw herself into making the ranch not just a workplace but a true home. She planted a vegetable garden that flourished in the prairie soil, started raising chickens for eggs and meat, and even convinced David to let her try her hand at beekeeping after reading about it in a farming magazine. David, for his part, proved to be everything he'd promised as a husband. He consulted with Catherine on every major decision regarding the ranch, valued her opinions, and never made her feel like her contributions were less important than his own. When she suggested they expand into raising horses as well as cattle, he listened seriously to her reasoning and agreed it was a good idea. Together, they made the ranch more profitable than it had ever been. Catherine's careful management of the household budget freed up money for improvements and expansion. Her cooking kept the ranch hands happy and loyal, reducing turnover and increasing productivity. And her keen eye for efficiency helped them streamline operations in ways that saved both time and money. But more than just business partners, they were genuinely happy together. David made Catherine laugh with his dry sense of humor and surprised her with his occasional romantic gestures, like the time he rode 10 miles to bring her fresh peaches from a neighboring ranch, because she'd mentioned once that they were her favorite. Catherine, in turn, showed her love through countless small acts, mending his shirts so carefully the repairs were nearly invisible, packing his saddlebags with extra food when he had to ride out for the day, staying up late when he had paperwork to do so he wouldn't be alone. Their first Christmas together as a married couple was particularly meaningful. Catherine couldn't help but think about the previous Christmas, when she'd lost James, and everything she thought was secure. "Last Christmas left me alone and penniless," she told David as they decorated a small tree she'd cut from near the creek. "I was so scared and lost." David pulled her close. "And now I have everything," Catherine said simply. "A home, a husband I love, a future I'm excited about." "You gave me all of that, David. You took a chance on a desperate widow and gave her not just a job but a whole new life." "You gave me something too," David said seriously. "Before you came, I had a ranch, but I didn't have a home. I had success, but I didn't have anyone to share it with. You made everything mean something more. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Catherine Dalton." Hearing her married name still gave Catherine a thrill. She was Catherine Dalton now, not Catherine Thompson. She had a new identity, a new life, and she'd never been more grateful for anything. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before she told David. When she finally shared the news with him over dinner one evening in April, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. "A baby," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "We're going to have a baby. Next October, the doctor thinks," Catherine confirmed, smiling at his obvious joy. David came around the table and dropped to his knees beside her chair, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there," he said softly. "This is your father. I just want you to know that you're already the most loved baby in the territory, and I can't wait to meet you." Catherine laughed through happy tears. "You're going to be an amazing father." "I'm going to try," David said. "And you're going to be an incredible mother. This baby is the luckiest child in the world." The pregnancy progressed normally, though Catherine found the summer heat particularly difficult to bear. David worried over her constantly, insisting she rest more, trying to take over some of her household tasks. Catherine appreciated his concern but refused to be treated like an invalid. "Women have been having babies for thousands of years," she reminded him when he tried to forbid her from hanging laundry. "I'm pregnant, not dying. I can still work." "I just want you to be safe," David said. "You and the baby are the most important things in the world to me." They compromised. Catherine continued to do most of her regular work, but agreed to rest more often, and to let David help with the heavier tasks. She also agreed to his insistence that they hire a girl from town to come help with the housework as her pregnancy progressed. The girl, a 17-year-old named Lucy, was sweet and capable, and she proved invaluable as Catherine grew larger and more uncomfortable. She took over much of the heavy cleaning and helped with cooking, freeing Catherine to focus on preparing for the baby's arrival. David converted one of the spare bedrooms into a nursery, building a beautiful cradle from oak wood and painting the walls a soft yellow. Catherine sewed tiny clothes and blankets, marveling at how small everything was. The reality of becoming parents was both thrilling and terrifying. "What if I'm not good at this?" Catherine confessed one night as she folded baby clothes. "What if I don't know how to be a mother?" "Then we'll figure it out together," David said calmly, "just like we've figured out everything else. We'll make mistakes, sure, but we'll love this baby with everything we have, and that's the most important thing." On October 15, 1884, after 14 hours of labor, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. David was beside himself with joy, cradling his son with such tenderness that it made Catherine cry all over again. "He's perfect," David whispered, staring down at the tiny red face. "Catherine, he's absolutely perfect. What should we name him?" They discussed names for months but hadn't settled on anything definite. Now, holding their son, Catherine knew exactly what felt right. "Daniel," she said. "Daniel James Dalton." David looked at her in surprise. "After your first husband," Catherine nodded. "James was part of my life, part of my journey to you. And even though our marriage wasn't what I thought it was, he deserves to be remembered. This way, our son carries a piece of my past, but belongs completely to our future." "Daniel James Dalton," David repeated, testing out the name. He looked down at his son. "That's a strong name. A good name. Welcome to the world, Daniel. We've been waiting for you." The months after Daniel's birth were exhausting but wonderful. Catherine had never known it was possible to love someone as fiercely and completely as she loved her son. Every tiny sound he made, every expression that crossed his face, felt like a miracle. David was a devoted father, getting up with Catherine for nighttime feedings, walking the floor with Daniel when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint. Watching him with their son, Catherine fell in love with him all over again. "You're so good with him," she told David one afternoon, as she watched him play with 6-month-old Daniel, making faces that had the baby giggling with delight. "He's easy to be good with," David replied, lifting Daniel high and making him laugh again. "He's the best of both of us, Catherine. Look at him. He has your smile." Life on the ranch continued to thrive. With Lucy's help managing the household and a few new ranch hands to manage the growing herd, David and Catherine were able to expand operations even further. They bought the adjacent property when it came up for sale, increasing their land holdings significantly. They added horses to their operation, just as Catherine had suggested, and found there was good money to be made breaking and training horses for settlers and ranchers throughout the territory. By their third anniversary, the Dalton Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the region. But more importantly, Catherine and David had built a life filled with love and partnership. They worked together, made decisions together, faced challenges together, and celebrated successes together. When Daniel was 2 years old, Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. Their daughter, Elizabeth Marie, was born in the spring of 1887, and their family felt complete. Daniel was gentle with his baby sister, always wanting to help take care of her, and Catherine's heart swelled watching her children grow. Lucy had become an essential part of their household, almost like family, and she adored the children. She'd grown into a capable young woman, and Catherine often thought about how far they'd all come. Lucy had arrived as a poor girl looking for work, and now she was being courted by Tommy, one of the ranch hands, who'd finally worked up the courage to ask if he could take her to church socials. "Looks like we might be hosting a wedding soon," David commented one evening as they watched Tommy and Lucy sitting on the porch, talking and laughing together. "I hope so," Catherine said. "They'd be good for each other, and Lucy deserves happiness. She's been such a help to us." David pulled Catherine close, and they watched the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and pink. Daniel was playing at their feet with wooden horses David had carved for him, and Elizabeth was sleeping peacefully in Catherine's arms. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" David asked quietly. "If I hadn't been in town that day, if I hadn't seen you outside the Silver Star all the time," Catherine admitted. "I was so lost, David, so scared. I had no idea what I was going to do or how I was going to survive. And then you appeared and offered me a chance. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved." "You saved mine too," David said. "I just didn't know I needed saving. I thought having a successful ranch was enough, but you showed me what really matters. Love, family, partnership. Those are the things that make life worth living." Catherine looked up at him. "I never thought I could be this happy. After James died, after I lost everything, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd never feel safe or valued or loved again. But Christmas left me alone and penniless, and you, my wonderful cowboy, left me loved and wealthy beyond measure." "Not just wealthy in money," David said. "No," Catherine agreed. "Wealthy in all the ways that truly matter. I have love, I have family, I have purpose. I have a partner who treats me as an equal. I have everything I ever wanted and more than I ever dared to dream of." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Daniel grew into a thoughtful, hard-working boy who loved the ranch and showed early signs of having his father's gift with horses. Elizabeth was spirited and clever, keeping everyone on their toes with her endless questions and boundless energy. In 1889, when Daniel was 5 and Elizabeth was 2, Oklahoma Territory was officially organized, bringing more structure and opportunity to the region. Ardmore continued to grow, and with it, the Dalton Ranch prospered. David and Catherine became pillars of the community, known for their fairness, hard work, and generosity. They employed several families on the ranch now, and Catherine took pride in creating a good working environment. She remembered too well what it was like to be desperate for work, to need someone to take a chance on you. She made sure everyone who worked for them was treated fairly, paid well, and given opportunities to advance. One day in the summer of 1890, a young woman appeared at the ranch, looking thin and desperate. She reminded Catherine so much of herself 7 years earlier that her heart ached with recognition. "I'm looking for work," the woman said nervously. "Any kind of work. I can cook, clean, so." "I'm a hard worker, I promise." Catherine didn't hesitate. "What's your name?" "Mary, madam, Mary Collins." "Well, Mary, as it happens, we could use some extra help. Our household has gotten quite busy with 2 children and a growing operation. Can you start tomorrow?" Mary's eyes filled with tears. "Really? Just like that? You don't want references or anything?" Catherine smiled. "I believe in giving people chances when they need them. Someone once did that for me and it changed my life. Come back tomorrow morning and we'll get you settled." After Mary left, David came up behind Catherine and wrapped his arms around her. "You saw yourself in her, didn't you?" "I saw who I was before you found me," Catherine said. "Scared, alone, desperate. I want to be for her what you were for me, a chance, a new beginning." "You have such a good heart," David said, kissing the top of her head. "It's one of the 1,000 things I love about you." Mary proved to be an excellent worker, grateful for the opportunity and eager to prove herself. Watching her confidence grow over the following months, Catherine felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what wealth really meant, she realized. Not just having money or property, but having the resources and ability to help others, to make a positive difference in people's lives. On their 5th wedding anniversary, David gave Catherine a beautiful necklace, a delicate gold chain with a small diamond pendant. "It reminded me of your engagement ring," he said, as he fastened it around her neck. "I wanted you to have something to commemorate what we've built together." "It's beautiful," Catherine said, touching the pendant gently. "But you didn't need to get me anything. You give me gifts every day just by being you." 5 years, David mused. "It feels like both forever and no time at all. I can barely remember what life was like before you." "I can," Catherine said. "I remember exactly what it was like. Lonely, uncertain, empty in ways I didn't even realize. You filled all those empty spaces, David. You gave me a life I actually want to live." They hosted a small celebration at the ranch, inviting friends and neighbors to mark the occasion. As Catherine looked around at the people gathered in her home, the children playing, the sound of laughter and conversation filling the air, she felt overwhelmingly grateful. Pete raised a toast. "To David and Catherine, the finest ranchers and the best people I've ever had the privilege of working for. May you have many more years of health, happiness, and prosperity." "Hear, hear," everyone chorused, raising their glasses. Later that night, after all the guests had gone home and the children were in bed, Catherine and David sat on the porch as they so often did. The prairie stretched out before them, silver in the moonlight, peaceful and beautiful. "You ever wonder what James would think if he could see you now?" David asked carefully. It was a question he'd never asked before, and Catherine considered it seriously. "I think he'd be glad I found happiness again," she finally said. "James wasn't a bad man. He made mistakes, and he kept things from me that he shouldn't have, but I don't think he wanted me to suffer. I think he'd be relieved to know I landed on my feet, that I found someone who treats me well and that I've built a good life." "I hope so," David said. "I never want you to feel guilty about being happy with me." "I don't," Catherine assured him. "Not anymore. For a while I did. I felt like I was betraying James's memory by falling in love so quickly after his death. But I've come to understand that life is for the living. James is gone and nothing I do can change that. But I'm still here and you're here and we have a chance to build something beautiful together. It would be a waste not to embrace that." "You're very wise," David said. Catherine laughed. "I'm not wise. I just learned some hard lessons and tried to take the right things away from them. Losing everything taught me what really matters. Being poor taught me the value of generosity. Being alone taught me to appreciate partnership. And meeting you taught me that love doesn't follow a schedule or care about what's proper. Sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. As the years continued to pass, the Dalton family grew and flourished. In 1892, Catherine gave birth to another son whom they named Thomas David. And in 1895, their youngest daughter, Rose Catherine, completed their family. The ranch house had to be expanded to accommodate everyone, and the operation grew to include not just cattle and horses, but also crops and a thriving trade business. Daniel, now approaching his teenage years, showed remarkable aptitude for ranch management. He spent hours with his father, learning everything about running the operation, and David often commented that his son had a natural gift for the work. Elizabeth, spirited as ever, had developed a particular talent with horses, and could gentle even the most skittish animal with patience and soft words. Catherine watched her children grow with a mixture of pride and bittersweetness. They were good children, kind and hardworking, raised with strong values and genuine love. She couldn't help but think sometimes about how different their lives might have been if James hadn't died, if she'd never met David. Those alternate versions of reality felt like they belonged to someone else entirely. In the spring of 1897, Oklahoma Territory held a celebration marking a decade since its official organization. Ardmore threw a large festival, and the Daltons attended as a family. Walking through the crowded streets, seeing how much the town had grown and changed, Catherine felt like she was looking at a completely different world from the one she'd known that desperate New Year's Eve so long ago. "You look thoughtful," David observed, shifting young Rose to his other hip. "What are you thinking about?" "About how much has changed," Catherine said. 15 years ago, I was standing on a street not far from here, completely alone and terrified with no idea what was going to happen to me. And now look at us. 4 beautiful children, a successful ranch, a community we're part of. It's almost overwhelming to think about." David reached for her hand. "You've come a long way from that scared widow with $12 to her name." "We've come a long way," Catherine corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You gave me not just a job, but a purpose and a future. You made me wealthy, David, in every way that matters." "You made yourself wealthy," David countered. "I just gave you an opportunity. You're the one who took it and ran with it. You're the one who turned a job as a housekeeper into a true partnership. You're the one who built this life alongside me. Don't sell yourself short, Catherine. You're the strongest person I know." That night, at the dance that concluded the festival, David pulled Catherine onto the floor for a waltz. She'd learned to dance properly over the years, taking lessons from a woman in town who'd come from back east. As they moved across the floor, Catherine caught glimpses of other couples, other families, all living their lives and chasing their dreams in this rough, beautiful territory. "Happy," David murmured in her ear. "Extraordinarily," Catherine replied. "More than I ever imagined possible." The turn of the century brought new changes and challenges. The children were growing up, technology was advancing, and the wild frontier was gradually becoming more civilized. But through it all, Catherine and David's love remained constant. On their 15th wedding anniversary in August 1900, David surprised Catherine by taking her back to the oak tree where they'd been married. It was just the two of them. The children left at home with Mary, who'd become a permanent fixture in their household and like an aunt to the children. "I wanted to come back here," David said as they stood under the spreading branches, "to the place where we started our life together, to remind us of the promises we made." I remember every word, Catherine said. No secrets, true partnership, love and respect always. And have I kept those promises? David asked. Every single day, Catherine assured him. You've been everything you said you'd be and more. You've made me happier than I ever thought I could be. David pulled out a small box from his pocket. I have something for you. It's not much, but I wanted you to have it. Inside was a small gold locket. When Catherine opened it, she found 2 miniature photographs, one of her and David on their wedding day and another of all 6 of them as a family. So you can carry us all with you always, David said. Just like you carry us in your heart. Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. It's perfect, David, it's absolutely perfect. They stood there for a long time, holding each other, remembering everything they'd been through together. The struggles and triumphs, the joys and sorrows, the ordinary moments and extraordinary ones. All of it had woven together to create a life that was richer and more meaningful than either of them could have built alone. I love you, Catherine said. More now than on our wedding day, and I loved you desperately even then. You took a broken woman and helped her become whole again. You gave me a reason to hope when I thought hope was gone. You showed me that endings can also be beginnings, and that losing everything can be the first step toward gaining everything that truly matters. I love you too, David said. You took a lonely cowboy with a nice ranch and turned it into a home filled with love and laughter. You showed me what partnership really means. You gave me a family and a future worth working for. Christmas might have left you alone and penniless, Catherine, but you left yourself loved and wealthy by never giving up, by taking chances, by being brave enough to start over. I just had the incredible good fortune of being there when you needed someone. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, the prairie stretching out around them in all directions, Catherine felt a profound sense of peace. Her journey hadn't been easy. She'd lost much and struggled through dark times. But all of it had led her here to this life, to this man, to this family she'd helped build. The children came running when they saw their parents approaching, full of stories about what they'd done while they were gone. Daniel, now 16 and nearly as tall as his father, had been teaching Thomas how to ride better. Elizabeth had been working with a new foal in the barn, and little Rose had apparently convinced Mary to make cookies, which everyone had enjoyed thoroughly. That evening, as the sun set and the family gathered for dinner, Catherine looked around the table at the faces of the people she loved most in the world. This was her wealth. Not the land or the cattle or the money in the bank, though they had plenty of all three. Her wealth was here in this room, in these relationships, in this life they'd built together through love and hard work and unwavering commitment to each other. After dinner, David announced that he had news. I've been thinking, he said, that it's time we made some changes around here. Daniel is old enough now to take on real responsibility in running the ranch. I'm not getting any younger, and I want to start teaching him everything he needs to know to eventually take over. Daniel's face lit up. Really? Pa, you mean it? I mean it, David confirmed. You've been working hard and learning well. It's time to give you more of a say in how things are run. Your mother and I built this ranch together, and someday it'll be yours and your siblings to carry on. But that means you need to be ready. I won't let you down, Daniel promised, his young face serious and determined. Catherine felt a pang in her heart, seeing her eldest son on the verge of manhood. Where had the time gone? It seemed like just yesterday she'd been holding him as a newborn, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes. Now he was nearly grown, ready to step into his future. You could never let us down, Catherine told him. We're so proud of the man you're becoming, Daniel. You're hardworking, honest, and kind. Those are the qualities that really matter in life. The following years saw Daniel taking on more and more responsibility at the ranch. He had his father's gift for leadership and his mother's attention to detail, and he handled his new duties with maturity beyond his years. Elizabeth, now 14, had become an invaluable help to Catherine in managing the household, though her real passion remained the horses. Thomas, at 8, was still young but showed promise of being as capable as his older siblings. And Rose, at 5, was the sunshine of the family, bringing joy and laughter wherever she went. In 1903, Lucy and Tommy finally married in a ceremony at the ranch, and everyone celebrated the union of two people who'd found love while working for the Daltons. Catherine couldn't help but see echoes of her own story in theirs, another example of how the ranch had become a place where people could build lives and find happiness. As Catherine approached her 45th birthday in 1904, she sometimes paused to reflect on the remarkable journey her life had taken. From a frightened widow with nothing to her name, to a respected rancher's wife with a thriving family and successful operation, the transformation seemed almost miraculous. One evening, as she and David sat on their porch watching the stars, Catherine voiced these thoughts. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life," she said. "That I get to live here in this beautiful place with you and our children, that I went from having nothing to having everything that matters." David squeezed her hand. "You deserved all of it, Catherine. You worked for it, fought for it, and built it with your own two hands alongside me. This wasn't handed to you. You earned every bit of happiness you have." "We earned it together," Catherine corrected gently. "That's what partnership means, right? We built this life as a team." "The best team there ever was," David agreed. As they sat together in comfortable silence, Catherine thought about the young woman she'd been on that cold New Year's Eve in 1882. She'd been so scared, so lost, with no idea how she'd survive. If someone had told her then that within a few months she'd meet a cowboy who would change her entire life, she never would have believed it. If they'd told her she'd find love again, build a thriving ranch, raise 4 wonderful children, and live a life filled with purpose and joy, she would have thought they were telling fairy tales. But it had all happened. Christmas 1882 had left her alone and penniless, stripped of everything she'd thought was secure. But that ending had been the beginning of something far better. David Dalton, her cowboy, her partner, her love, had given her a chance when she desperately needed one. And together, they'd built something extraordinary. Now, 22 years after that desperate day in Ardmore, Catherine Dalton sat beside her husband on their thriving ranch, surrounded by the life they'd built together, and knew herself to be the wealthiest woman in the territory. Not because of money or land, though they had plenty of both, but because she had love, she had family, she had purpose, and she had a partner who'd stood beside her through everything life had thrown their way. "What are you thinking about?" David asked, noticing her smile. "Just that I'm grateful," Catherine said simply, "for everything. For you most of all. You saved my life, David Dalton, in every way a person can be saved." "And you saved mine," David replied. "We saved each other, Catherine. That's what love is supposed to do." As the stars wheeled overhead and the prairie wind whispered through the grass, Catherine leaned against her husband's shoulder and felt completely at peace. The journey from that desperate Christmas to this moment of contentment had been long and sometimes difficult, but every step had been worth it. She'd lost everything once, only to gain everything that truly mattered. Christmas had left her alone and penniless. But a cowboy had left her loved, wealthy beyond measure, and finally, completely home.